I'd like to begin by acknowledging that no matter where we are this evening, we are all on Aboriginal land, and pay my respect to elders past and present. A huge welcome to everybody this evening. Thank you for joining us and making time to be part of this important conversation about when to report and share information about children and adults at risk from domestic and family violence. My name is Moo Balch. I'm the Director of Primary Prevention at the Women's and Girls Emergency Centre in Sydney, and I'm delighted to be your MC for this evening's session. We have a packed agenda and some slides that will be coming up very soon. So just beginning by acknowledging this evening I'm in Tasmania, I'm on Palawa land, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. And on behalf of tonight's panelists as well, we're all on different Aboriginal lands this evening. We pay our respects to the elders, custodians and traditional owners of the country that they're joining us from, acknowledging that sovereignty was never ceded and that this was, is and always will be Aboriginal land. I also extend respects on behalf of the group to any Aboriginal colleagues who may be joining us this evening. A bit of a note on self-care. You would be aware the nature of this webinar means that we will be talking about sensitive materials this evening, things that may trigger feelings about abuse and violence. The statistics tell us that in every single community, domestic and family violence is prevalent and complex and highly gendered. It happens across every postcode, across every socio-demographic group, and there are survivors and people who use violence in every profession and every community. And so it's therefore quite likely that there will be people in tonight's group who maybe are currently being impacted or have experienced violence or potentially or even using abuse in their intimate partner or family relationships. Just be aware that there is help available. 1-800-RESPECT is the National Sexual Assault and Domestic and Family Violence Counselling Service, provides 24/7 confidential support. Lifeline, of course, Men's Line Australia can support men who are either using or experiencing violence or abuse in their relationships, and the Doctors for Doctors service, and we'll talk a bit more about these referrals at the end as well. Doctors for Doctors can provide confidential support for you as GPs. So why we're here this evening, look, just very briefly, we have 4 experts who are going to talk about specific aspects of recognising, responding and referring to violence. This pilot is an Australian government initiative that has been administered by the Department of Health. It's part of a much broader suite of measures that sit under the 4th Action Plan to prevent violence against women and their children. And it's all about strengthening healthcare outcomes and facilitating better access to information for health and medical services in the community, and supporting primary care sector's response to domestic and family violence. There are 6 PHNs across Australia involved in the pilot, 1 in Queensland, 2 in Victoria and 3 in New South Wales. The 3 New South Wales PHNs are all here this evening. If you're interested in learning more about their services, we'll have QR codes with their contact details at the end of this session. So the learning objectives for tonight's session are to understand more about mandatory reporting and what happens after you make a report, to understand how to provide a strengths-based notification in support of a protective parent, to understand when consent is needed to share information about adults at risk of serious harm, and to understand more about the New South Wales Safer Pathway system and the referral process. And finally, also to understand when to contact police and what happens when police are involved. The information tonight, we can't possibly give you everything in 90 minutes. So the intention of the webinars is to give you an overview on the subject matter. If you have questions about anything that's raised tonight, we encourage you to seek further clarification from the service or organisation, and be aware that there are other services and support places that you can contact. For example, the New South Wales Health Child Wellbeing Unit. And we will be putting some things in the chat as well. So as we talk, as links to useful things like the White Book and Safer Pathways and toolkits come up, we will add them in the chat, and they will be sent out to you afterwards. So let's get started. We've got 4 experts who will present some insights into specific aspects of recognising, responding and sharing information about domestic and family violence. We'll have a brief pause after each speaker. So if you've got any questions, stick them in the chat as they're speaking, and I will try and get to them at the end. I'm very honoured to introduce the first speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Hindmarsh. She's going to be presenting on the role of GPs. Libby has been working in general practice for over 30 years. She worked as a GP principal in Glebe, and following that in Aboriginal health on Elcho Island in the Northern Territory, and in an Aboriginal general practice on the outskirts of Sydney. She's been a GP supervisor and involved in many aspects of GP education. She's worked on a range of different projects with the Royal Australian College of GPs in the area of family and domestic abuse and violence. She's a co-editor of the White Book with Professor Kelsey Hegarty, and is currently working on the 5th edition, Abuse and Violence, working with our patients in general practice. She's worked as a medical educator doing clinical training, visits to GP registrars, teaching mental health for our CGP rural, and doing presentations, workshops and writing in the areas of family and domestic violence, mental health and advanced care planning. She's been involved in mentoring and supervising GPs. She's the chairperson for the RAC GP Faculty of Specific Interest, Abuse and Violence in Families Network. Libby, thank you so much for being here. Before you start, I'm just going to read the case study so that everybody's aware what it is that we're going to be talking about this evening. This, I believe, is a real case that we have adapted slightly. And Sarah, 32 years old, has brought her 2-year-old son Hunter into the medical practice as he had a large egg-shaped bruise on his forehead. Sarah has a partner, Anthony, who also resides in the home. He's the father of Hunter. Sarah tells us that Hunter was running around the lounge room and tripped, resulting in him hitting his head on the coffee table. After conducting an examination on him, you notice that there's bruising on Sarah's arms and discoloration on her neck. You ask reception to watch Hunter while you have a chat to Sarah alone, and mention to Sarah your observations of her injuries and ask whether she's okay. Sarah mentions that Anthony was upset with her due to Hunter hurting himself, and that he blamed Sarah and said she should have been doing a better job of looking after him. Sarah mentions that it has happened before, but refuses to go into specifics. Libby, please give us your observations on this case study. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moo. Welcome, everybody. This would be a challenging thing to happen to us in general practice. So we're just going to reflect a little bit on this case. So of course, it would be important as a first step to check Hunter and assess his injury. It's really important always in general practice to start where the patient or the parent is at. So, but while you're doing that, you've noticed that Sarah has bruising on her arm and neck. So you need to think quickly how you might manage this. So one of the sort of principles of talking to people when you think there's some sort of abuse and violence going on is to talk to them on their own. And so it wouldn't matter if Hunter was a child in arms and probably up to about 2, but you might be a little bit concerned because as children get older, they can sometimes report what's been said at the consultation to the perpetrator. So, Lauren, can we have the next point, please? Yeah. So you ask her what's about this, and she tells you that Anthony and her partner has done this to her because he blamed her for Hunter's injury. So how would you address this? So Sarah's actually told you that she's being abused, and in fact, that she's being physically abused. So you might sort of start by talking to her in the way the WHO suggests we do this in primary care, by using lives. So we're going to listen, we're going to inquire, we're going to validate what she's done and what's happening to her. So you might say to Sarah something like, I'm I'm really sorry to hear that this is happening to you. And, what is, and although Anthony is blaming you, you are not to blame either for what has happened to Hunter, and certainly not to blame for the way that Anthony is behaving. So, and then the other issue is really important, is to be checking on Sarah and Hunter's safety. So we know that Sarah has been physically attacked. She's got marks on her neck, which indicates that she may have been strangled. And we know that with strangulation, that increases the chances of somebody being killed by 7 times. So this is quite a significant situation. And we're also concerned about Hunter's safety. And we may say to Sarah, well, you've been telling me about what's happened to you and the bruises you've got on your arm, and I'm very concerned about the marks on your neck. Did Anthony attempt to strangle you in some way? And I'm also concerned about Hunter's safety, and I wonder if Anthony ever shouts at, hits, or does anything to Hunter. So, and then you might ask Sarah if in fact she is safe to go home today. You haven't got a lot of time in this consultation, so if you could manage to arrange for Sarah to come back, that would be really helpful at this stage, and so that you can go on exploring a bit what's going on. Because we need to think about, in this situation, what our responsibility is about mandatory reporting, because Hunter's living in a family where there's domestic violence, and Sarah is really at risk if she's been hit, but also particularly if she's been strangled. So tonight we're going to think about things like safer pathways, which we can use for adult survivors. We're going to think about what we should do about child protection, and we could think about how sometimes we may need to involve the police.
Thanks, you, Libby.
Lou. Thanks.
Thank you, Libby. Does anybody have any questions for Libby before we move on to the next presenter? Please, if you do, please stick them in the chat now. If you think of something in the next few minutes, I will try and get to it at the end as well. Thanks, Libby. In that case, I will introduce our next speaker. Jade Anderson is a Child Protection Manager caseworker for the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice, also known as DCJ. Jade has been working for DCJ in the child protection sector for the past 11 years and has a keen interest in domestic violence support and education. Jade's going to talk to us a bit about mandatory reporting, when to report, what to include in a report, and what happens when a report is made. I will pass over to you, Jade. Thank you.
Thanks, Moo. So yeah, as Moo said, I'm just here to talk to you about, I guess, some of the legislation in which we rely upon in regards to mandatory reporting, and yeah, some ideas in terms of when to report. So just go to the next slide. So in terms of our legislation, for the purpose of mandatory reporting, a child is classified at risk of significant harm. Sorry, I just want to make sure that that's my first slide. Yep, it is. The child or young person's basic physical or psychological needs not being met or at risk of not being met. The parent or caregivers have not arranged or unable or unwilling to arrange for the child or young person to receive necessary medical care. In the case of a child or young person is required to attend school according to the Education Act, they have not arranged or willing to arrange the child or young person to receive their education. The ones that I guess become more relevant in terms of general practice is the child or young person has been or is at risk of being physically or sexually abused or ill-treated. The child or young person is living in a household where there have been incidents of domestic violence, and as a consequence, the child or young person is at risk of serious physical or psychological harm. A parent or other caregiver has behaved in such a way towards the child or young person that they have suffered or is at risk of suffering serious psychological harm. And there's also a subsection F, which is in regards to prenatal reports. So for babies and fetuses, I guess, that are still in utero. If they have experienced even just one of these above, then they're at risk they're considered to be at risk of ROSH. I'll just go to the next slide. So the legislation that's relied upon in regards to mandatory reporting is the Children and Young Persons Care and Protection Act, 1998. Chapter 3, Part 2, and Section 27 is in regards to mandatory reporting. And this section applies to a person in the course of his or her professional work or other paid employment, delivers healthcare, welfare, education, children's services, residential services, or law enforcement, wholly or partly to children. And they hold a management position in an organisation which include direct responsibility or supervision to the provision of healthcare, welfare, education, children's services, residential services, or law enforcement. A person in religious ministry or a person providing religious-based activities, or a registered psychologist providing professional service as a psychologist. If the person whom this section applies has reasonable grounds to suspect that a child is at risk of harm, and those grounds arise during the course of their work, then it is your duty to report that as soon as practical to the secretary, which is DCJ, within the Children's Child Protection Helpline. Next slide. So to get some more, I guess, advice about making a risk of significant harm, because sometimes I guess it's hard to know whether you have enough information to make a report. You can always contact the New South Wales Health Child Wellbeing Unit, and the number is there. They can assist you to identify appropriate actions and referrals in response to concerns. They can give you relevant information held about past child protection related concerns, and they can provide guidance about how to raise the health, safety and wellbeing concerns with parents. All the contact with the Child Wellbeing Unit it's documented in a statewide interagency database, and they can help escalate high risk matters to the Child Protection Helpline on your behalf. Also, the mandatory reporting guide can be accessed at that website just there. It has a decision tree which sort of indicates what action you should be taking based on your concerns and the information that you've been able to gather through your work with the clients. So in regards to, I guess, how to make a ROSH report, you can, as we said, contact the Child Wellbeing Unit. You can also contact the Child Protection Helpline, that's 132 111, or make an e-report. The information within that report needs to be identifying details such as the name, phone number and address of the parents as well as the children, as long as you have it. An outline of the risk of harm concerns. It's really important to provide contextual information, and that includes strengths. So that includes, like, say they're engaged with a certain service, maybe it's a domestic violence service, or say the maternal grandmother is living in the home. Any strengths are really important to include. It doesn't negate the need to make that report and report those concerns, but on this end, when we receive the report, it just helps us to assess, I guess, the strengths and the vulnerabilities of the family, and to see, what services and what things that we can build upon and maybe bring in to assist the family. Include any, I guess, conversations or discrepancies that you have identified. So I guess, for example, whether, like, the injuries match, like, the explanation, or even in terms of how like the mother may present, and if she's appearing nervous or she's stuttering over her answers, or like she gives one response and then later on something is contradictory. It's important to, I guess, identify that and use your analysis skills. And also include, I guess, whether there's going to be any follow-up or further medical visits or treatment. So that way that we can also then follow up with your practice in terms of whether those things were adhered to or whether they didn't return again. So this is just a little bit of a flow chart in regards to what happens when you make a child protection report. So it first goes to the Child Protection Helpline. They will take the information from you, and they'll also have a look at the history for the family, and they'll make a determination of whether it meets ROSH. If it doesn't meet ROSH, then the information is still recorded and it's still always going to be visible there. But if it does, then it's sent to the closest CSC, which is closest office to where the family reside. When it arrives here at the CSC, we have a look at the reported information, and that we look at the history of the family, and then sometimes we'll do further follow-up. So that may be, we may follow up back to the practice to find some more information, or if we know the kids attend school, we may call the school or any other services that they're engaged with. And then ultimately, there's a few different outcomes that could happen from your report. It could be allocated for a field assessment, and that's where we go out and do a safety assessment for the children, or it could be closed under competing priorities. So for reports that are closed, 2 managers need to read that report and both agree that we can't respond. Okay. So just in regards to when a report has been made, the outcome. So the report is closed. Any additional information is recorded on our child protection system. And this information is able to be reviewed when any further reports come in to help establish patterns of neglect and harm. So that's why it's important, even if you're unsure, it's always important to make that report. And it may not be action that time, but it always helps build a picture for us, and can show us when there's increased risk. So in reality, the reporter is not always likely to receive an outcome. I think we're working towards ensuring that mandatory reporters do get something in writing to say what happens with the report. But if you don't hear anything, probably don't be surprised. Just, I guess, for example, in the local area that I am, we would have probably at least 600 reports a month that we have to go through. So sometimes it's not always able or practical to give a response. The other alternative is that they're allocated for a field response. The family will be contacted and a home visit or interview conducted. We speak with the children and the parents. That children are usually spoken with separately. The reporter's identity will never be disclosed to the family or anyone else without the explicit permission from the reporter themselves. So you are protected by legislation that says that we'd never, ever reveal the identity. So families often will guess. They'll try and guess, and they'll say, all the other people. It doesn't matter if they get it right or wrong. We will always say that we're not able to disclose that information, and that's protected information. Then assessment of the safety and risk will be conducted of the children, and appropriate services and support will be offered to reduce the risk of significant harm concerns. And I think, is that my last slide? Yep, and that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jade. that is such hard and important work that you do, and doing it for 11 years, I take my hat off to you. It's incredibly difficult working within the child protection space. One of my observations as somebody who's been around in the domestic and family violence space for a while is that the connections between domestic and family violence, protective parents, usually mothers, and child protection has got much better over the years. I wonder if you've got any kind of observations on that you'd like to share in terms of your experience as a case manager in that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's absolutely been a very significant shift in the way that we practice, and always making sure that women and children's safety is paramount. So I think we're very careful in terms of how we approach families when we first get a report, trying to make sure we will do it when the time, like, call the mum at a time when maybe the perpetrator is not present. We will make sure that they are able to speak with us. We will speak with them separately there. And we also, I guess, we talk a lot of terms in terms of acts of resistance. So we see that the things that women do and the choices that they make often are acts of resistance, fighting against the violence that is perpetrated against them. So we very much look in that lens to make sure that we see the strengths of families, we see the strengths of victims, and what they do to protect themselves or make themselves as safe as they could possibly be, even in that environment. So we don't look at it and say, oh, they haven't left, therefore they're not protective. No, they are doing the best they can and keeping them as safe as they can be, in an environment that they can control as much as they can. So yeah, we definitely try and work alongside and hold men and perpetrators, accountable for the acts of violence that they perpetrate, and not hold women responsible for that.
Thank you, Jade. And just one other question before I let you go. If a GP needs to make a mandatory report on a child at risk and the child's parents share custody,
yep.
Do I as a GP need to inform the other parent?
No, I would not say that you would need to inform the other parent. Often what happens if we are, say it is a separate family and there's stepmothers and stepfathers, and the child shares custody between both, we will often contact that other parent and do an assessment with that parent as well. So you don't necessarily have to inform it, but if we allocate it for assessment, generally we will also contact that other parent and share the concerns that we have with them.
Thank you. That might be something that we discuss a little bit later on in the panel. Thanks, Jade. Really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and experience in this space.
No worries. Thank you.
Excuse me. Next up, we have Alice Stiles. Alice is the manager of the Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Program, which is also known as WDV CAP, the unit at Legal Aid New South Wales. She's worked for WDV CAP for 10 years and has been heavily involved in the development and rollout of Safer Pathway. It doesn't feel like it's been that long, Alice, but and I'm sure neither of us have aged in that time, but I feel as if we have real expertise in the room in terms of Safer Pathway. So thank you so much for being with us this evening. Alice is going to talk about sharing information about adults at risk and consent, a bit of an introduction to Safer Pathway, what it is and how it works, and then run through the DVSAT, the safety assessment tool, and Safer Pathway referrals as well. So thank you.
Alice, you're
on mute, Alice.
Hello.
There you go. Brilliant. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. Hello, everyone, and thank you for that lovely introduction, Moo. You'd think I'd be I know how to turn myself off mute now, but seems not. Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here talking about such an important topic, and I'm just amazed and always that people attending anything after hours. So I think, yeah, really am grateful to be here and grateful that you're all here as well. I'm just going to share my screen. Can someone let me know you can see that?
Yes,
all right.
That's good. We can see
Fabulous.
the screen.
All right. So I am, as Moo said, I'm here to talk to you about Safer Pathway, which is, I like to think of it as the service system infrastructure for supporting people experiencing DFV in New South Wales. So it's a whole of government system rather than an individual service. But before I talk about Safer Pathway, I thought I'd just give you some context about why it is that I'm the one lucky enough to be speaking with you today. And that's because I manage contracts for a network of frontline specialist services for women experiencing domestic and family violence across the state. Those services have the very long title of the Women's DV Court Advocacy Services. I know it's a mouthful, but they are, very, very amazing frontline services that specialise in supporting women experiencing domestic and family violence. They're available across the entire state, so every suburb, town, city has access to a WDV CAS, and we can help women at any stage of their experience of domestic and family violence, regardless of whether they're engaging with police or the court process, and so on. And just to give you a sense of the scale of our work, in 2021, we assisted just over 54,000 women. And most importantly, for the purposes of this session this evening, we are really, really keen to help build connections between the primary care and specialist DV systems. We know, as I think everyone working in domestic and family violence knows, that so often people experiencing that abuse do not go directly to a specialist service first because they don't know perhaps that specialist service exists, or they are afraid or uncertain for various reasons, and they certainly often don't go to the police in the first instance, but they do talk to their GPs, who are a source of support and trusted advice. So it's really vital, I think, that we build that relationship between you guys doing the amazing work of primary care and the specialist DV system. So that's my background. That's why I'm here this evening. So what is Safer Pathway? As I said, it's sort of the infrastructure when it comes to supporting people experiencing DFV in New South Wales. It started in 2014. It was rolled out in 2 sites initially, and it is now available statewide as of late 2018. The system has 5 elements, which I will talk about in turn. And I just want to say up front, I know that there are many, many acronyms, which is unfortunate, but hopefully by the end of the presentation, it won't seem so complicated. The first part of Safer Pathway is the Domestic Violence Safety Assessment Tool, which is really a standardised risk assessment tool that agencies and services can use when they're working with someone experiencing DFV. And the idea is that we have a common language for understanding whether someone is at threat or risk, or at really serious risk, at high risk of harm. The second part of the system is a computer system. We love a good computer system. It's called the Central Referral Point, and it's really a streamlined way of getting referrals for people from A to B. The part of the system that will be of most relevance, I think, to GPs is number 3, the local coordination points. And they are a network of specialist services across the state for victim survivors. So although I, on the previous slide, spoke about the services for women, Safer Pathway also has services for men. So whether the client or patient you're speaking with is male or female, or indeed non-binary or gender diverse, they can absolutely access support through Safer Pathway. Element 4 of Safer Pathway are the Safety Action Meetings, or SAMs. I'm not sure, you might have heard of these. These are interagency meetings about people assessed as at serious threat of injury or death due to DFV. So as an example, if police or a DV service complete the tool in number 1, if they complete that tool with a patient or a client, and that person is identified as at serious threat of future harm, they will be referred to the safety action meeting in their area. So I'll talk a bit more about SAMs in a future slide, but essentially it's the prioritised interagency response to that group of victim survivors who are really at the gravest risk of harm right now. And then underpinning all those other elements of Safer Pathway, we have some information sharing provisions in legislation. Part 13A of the Crimes, Domestic and Personal Violence Act allows us to share information, particularly where a person is at serious threat. So again, I'll talk more about this in a moment, but the long story short is that Part 13A allows you as a GP to share information about a client if they are at serious threat due to domestic and family violence. So who can Safer Pathway help? We can help anyone experiencing domestic and family violence in New South Wales. This system is free. It's available across the state, every suburb, town, city, as I said, whether the person's at threat or at serious threat, and whether the person is presently engaged with the police or the court process. The only caveat I should have mentioned on this slide is that we are a service or a system predominantly for people aged 16 and above. So if the primary patient that you're working with is, for example, a woman experiencing DFV, we are absolutely a great option to refer her to. If she has children that are, of course, also going to be impacted by that DFV, as the previous speaker was speaking about, we wouldn't take a referral for those clients for those children, as clients in their own right. We would work with mum and then try and make appropriate referrals for those children to other services or indeed to the child protection system. And anyone can refer to Safer Pathway, a GP, police, a local drug and alcohol service, community corrections, any service or organisation can refer someone experiencing DFV to Safer Pathway. What can we do? So when we receive a referral, Safer Pathway, I like to think of it as the front door or the first step in getting domestic and family violence support. So we certainly can't do everything, but we are a great place to start. When we receive a referral, we assess the level of threat to that person. So we do that domestic violence safety assessment tool to determine if we think they are at threat or at serious threat. And then we do safety planning with that person. Whether they're at threat or serious threat, that safety planning happens regardless. Then we try and connect people with the services they need in their local area for whatever their key needs are at the time. So they might need a safe place to live. They might need some counselling. They might need legal advice. They might need financial help. We would try and connect them with the supports they need for any or all of those needs. If the client or victim survivor has a court matter, so say police have applied for an ADVO for them, or indeed have charged the perpetrator with a criminal offence, the women referred through Safer Pathway will always also receive court advocacy for that. Unfortunately, that level of support isn't available for male victim survivors at the present time. And then, as I mentioned on the previous slide, for those people assessed as at serious threat, they will also get that extra layer of support, being the safety action meeting. The idea of a safety action meeting is that key services in an area, so police, health, child protection, housing, corrective services, education, NGOs, all get around the table and put together the best understanding they have, the best, most comprehensive picture they can of a person's situation, and then come up with practical, targeted actions they can take to try and reduce the threat to that person's safety. So it's about information sharing and action planning. And those actions are for the people at the SAM, not the victim survivor. So it's about what can we we services and providers have a joint responsibility to do what we can. So the actions are for us as SAM members. It's important when we're talking about making referral into Safer Pathway to also be really upfront about the limitations. So as I mentioned, unfortunately we can't do everything. Generally, Safer Pathway can't do case management, and by that I mean longer term intensive therapeutic support with clients. We can certainly try and connect clients with that type of support if they need it, but we are usually the first part of someone's journey. So we do safety planning, as I said, connecting them with local services, and then that safety action meeting component for the serious threat clients. And I also always want to flag that Safer Pathway services are business hours services. So it's really important that you remember those numbers that Moo spoke about at the very beginning of this session, 1-800-RESPECT in particular, which is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week phone line. So if you've got a client who you see out of hours, I know often you work on a Saturday morning, for example, and they need assistance right now, they need to talk to someone right now, I would give them the 1-800-RESPECT number. If you want to make a referral for a patient to us, to Safer Pathway, obviously the best place to start is always to ask them if they would like to speak to a specialist domestic and family violence service. It's always best practice to get a person's consent before referring them anywhere, which is, I'm sure, your standard practice, and that includes to Safer Pathway. If the patient you're working with is female, and that includes cisgender women, transgender women, and non-binary people, if they're comfortable working with a historically women-focused service, you can offer them the 1-800-WDV-CAS number, 1-800-938-227. Or if you have the time and that works well for you, you can also call that 1-800 number together with the patient in the appointment. For male patients, unfortunately, they are in the process of getting a 1-800 number. They don't have it yet, but you can offer an email address that will connect them with those supports locally. If the patient consents to that referral, obviously that's the ideal scenario. So you can give them the number and they can go away and think about contacting us. And then you can make the call directly with them and provide information like their contact details and any particular safety concerns. As I mentioned before, we are a business hours service, so there's 1-800-RESPECT out of hours, or the DV line, which is a service for women in New South Wales. If a patient doesn't accept a referral, there are two options or two scenarios that might occur. If a patient declines a Safer Pathway referral, but you feel they are at threat, there are concerns, but you don't believe right now it's very serious, I would just encourage the patient to save, if it's a female patient, to save the 1-800-WDV-CAS number in their phone in case they want to call the service later. And you can always have that conversation with them again in future appointments if they are still experiencing domestic and family violence, or you're still worried about them. So that's if they decline, but they're at threat. If a patient declines a Safer Pathway referral, but you believe they are at serious threat, you can still make a referral for them under Part 13A. So again, that's the part of the legislation that allows providers, including health providers, to share relevant information in order to reduce a serious threat to a person's life, health, or safety due to DV. It's important, of course, to note that Part 13A doesn't mean that you can suddenly share everything that you know about a person. Particularly as GPs, you might have a lifetime's worth of very personal information about someone. What you can share under Part 13A is the information that's relevant to that serious threat situation right now, and the information that's necessary to reduce that threat. So in these circumstances, we'd be talking about you making a referral to the service, so you'd share the person's name, contact number, and the reason for your concern. As we've talked about briefly, there are two ways you can determine that someone is at serious threat. You can complete the domestic violence safety assessment tool with them if you wish. That has 25 indicators that touch on known risks, known things that are really concerning. Obviously, they're things like previous violence, threats of violence, strangulation, sexual assault, stalking, pregnancy and new birth. Unfortunately, it's a sad fact that is a time of heightened risk to women experiencing DFV. So you can go through that tool if you wish. You can also decide that someone is at serious threat on the basis of your professional judgment. We know that no risk assessment tool is perfect, and there are times where you just don't have the time to complete that tool with people. So you can, on the basis of your professional judgment, say, I'm just extremely concerned about this patient right now. She's presented with visible injuries. She seems extremely afraid and won't talk to me. I'm going to make a referral for her, even though she hasn't consented. I know, and I will leave this for my PHN colleagues to speak with you about, but there is also work underway as part of this wonderful project to have a sort of a GP tailored version of a DV action plan, which sort of touches on key factors that you might want to think about when determining if someone's at serious threat. Sorry, I think I've covered this. This is my last slide about you can determine someone to be at serious threat based on the DVSAT or your professional judgment. As always, consent, of course, is important in every possible interaction. So if you think someone's at serious threat based on your appointments with a patient and you offer them a referral to Safer Pathway and they say no, they say they're really afraid, then say a couple of appointments down the track, there's been another serious assault and you're just very, very concerned and the patient continues to decline. If you want, you can tell them, I am so concerned that I'm going to make a referral for you to this service and they will be in touch with you. Last but not least, very important that if someone is at serious and imminent threat, so as an example, the patient's partner who you believe to be the perpetrator is waiting in the reception area or outside, and the patient discloses something to you that makes you just extremely concerned for her safety, I would encourage you to call police on 000. General advice, there's a wealth of information I know available through that white book that Libby has worked on so much through your PHN, and also very welcome to contact me. My details are on this last slide here, as is the DCJ website. Thanks, Moo.
Thank you so much, Alice. I'm going to invite again our audience to ask any questions that they may have in the chat. And while people are thinking about it, Alice, if somebody's doing a DVSAT, if a GP is doing a DVSAT and they identify some safety concerns, but the patient gets to a point through those 25 questions that they feel they just say, look, I don't want to keep going for whatever reason. What would your advice be to a GP?
I would say that's okay. That's actually very to be expected. So that 25 questions is a lot of questions for anyone, and it's very, very difficult stuff to talk about sometimes. So I would just encourage the GP to say, oh, that's okay. I understand that you don't want to complete this right now. Maybe we can complete it in our next appointment. Give that person some time to think. And if, say, you get halfway through the tool and the patient doesn't want to go any further, if you offer a Safer Pathway referral or indeed the 1-800 respect number, but they're just resistant to all specialist options and you have serious threat concerns, that's when you could make a referral without consent. But just generally, I would say just try and encourage the patient that it's okay. It's absolutely understandable that this is difficult to talk about and we can complete it at another time. You could also just say, if you don't want to do this with me right now, how about I give you the 1-800 WDV-CAS number and you can call them at a time that works for you when you're feeling okay and that they can go through it with you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We have had such a wealth of information this evening from experts working across the space. Does anybody have any questions for Brooke? You're a quiet audience this evening. Brooke, I might just ask you if you've got some tips, and we know this happens a lot. If I've got a patient who's had a bad experience with police, perhaps they come from a community where there is, mistrust in police. What advice would you give to navigating reporting to police?
So, as indicated, there is a domestic violence officer in every police station. If your patient wants to report the matter to the police, but they don't want to just ring up and have them attend. They just don't want to, they don't want to ring up and have them attend because they don't know who's going to attend up and how they're going to be treated. In addition, they don't want to walk into the police station and sit there for hours. I understand that's also a concern. Look, an appointment can't be made, but if either you as the medical professional or your patient contacts the domestic violence officer at the police station, you still will be referred to a general duties police officer to take the report. However, if an explanation is given in relation to the reluctance of your patient or to come in and to come forward, but they really want to come forward, they really want to provide a statement and they really want the help of the police, but they have a distrust, arrangements can, and their local arrangements of course, can often be made to ensure that the victim is treated in the appropriate manner, which they always will be. However, in a distrusted situation like that, sometimes knowing who they are and that they come in and can help victims come forward a lot easier. So contacting the domestic violence officer to organise something would be always the best way to go about it.
Thank you. Yeah. And I've got a really sticky one for you here. What happens if you know the family that's involved and you suspect the person who is the perpetrator is a police officer? What would your advice be in those circumstances? And we know it happens from time to time, right?
No, and look, exactly the same advice. I'll report it. If the perpetrator is a police officer, report it. If there are concerns, go to the domestic violence officer. If there are further concerns because they work at the station that in which it's occurred, go to another station. Ask to speak to the inspector. You can always report something where there is a distrust issue or you are concerned. Like obviously police officers in these situations are treated like anybody else. However, if there is a concern and a distrust, there's Professional Standards Command that it can always be reported to. However, they will only return it back to the Police Area Command, asking to speak to the domestic violence officer, the station supervisor, asking to speak to an inspector to ensure that an inspector at the police station to ensure the complaint's taken, and it is followed through like every other complaint that's made.
Beautiful, thank you, Brooke. And we've got our first audience question for this evening. Holly, if I could give you a prize, I would. Holly wants to know, and this might be one for all of the panel, but I'll throw it to you first, Brooke. Do you have any advice for relating to apprehended violence orders for people under the age of 16?
Yes. So if the police investigate a matter and the victim is under 16, regardless of whether it's domestic violence or not, the police must apply for that apprehended violence order on their behalf. That's as a result of the investigation. If they have fears and there's fears held for the people, the police must apply for the apprehended violence order. That's held within the legislation, that view. So I don't know if they want further clarification than that.
Holly, please add to the chat if you would like more information. I might invite the rest of the panelists to come back now, because we're going to have a little bit of a discussion, and this is your opportunity to ask questions of our 4 experts this evening. So please hop in if there's anything that you are unclear about, if there's anything that any of our experts this evening have spoken about. Please stick something in the chat. In the meantime, I might start with you, Libby. A question around, what you need to let your patient know. If I have a patient and I believe that I have to make a mandatory report, what would be the best way to broach that conversation?
If you feel you've got a protective parent, so the mother is the protective parent, for example, and you feel that you have to mandatory report, it's a good idea to talk with her about that, and sometimes it can be helpful to actually do the report with her there, but you need to be doing it in need to be telling her that you're doing it in a way that you are supporting her as the protective parent. So you're not reporting her. It's a very difficult situation. And it's not an easy thing to do, but to explain to her that you need to do a mandatory report, but that you are not reporting her, you're reporting what's going on in the family with the perpetrator.
Yeah, thank you, Libby. You're right, it's a very tough conversation to have. I've got a question for Alice. The DVSAT is being evaluated. Where are we up to with that? Is the current tool used by all domestic and family violence services? And I'm laughing because I work in a domestic and family violence service, and I probably have some comments on this one. But Alice, you go first.
Thanks for the question. Yes, we are in the process of redesigning the DVSAT. There was an evaluation of Safer Pathway in 2019, and one of the recommendations was that the DVSAT could be improved to be easier to use and more predictive of future harm. So we're working in partnership with the police to work as best we can to make the tool better. Our goal is to have a tool ready for testing by the end of this year. So we issued a consultation paper to the domestic and family violence sector at the very end of last year to see what they thought about our approach. There are definitely a whole conversation in itself, risk assessment, but how many questions? Too few, too many? Should they be weighted? Is to be crude, to be, should someone get it? We should be more worried if they tell us that they're being stalked versus being financially controlled and that sort of thing. So it is really tricky, particularly because, I don't know if I made this clear enough in my presentation, that Safer Pathway is available to people experiencing domestic and family violence in its broadest sense. So intimate partner relationships, exes, family members, people living in your house. So we are really trying to develop a tool for many, many different types of people and scenarios. So, but to answer your question, the end of the year is the plan.
Yeah, thank you. Brooke, a question about victims being charged with domestic and family violence offences when they're not the primary aggressor. Have you got any comments on that? It's obviously something we hear about a fair bit in the media. And we know that police have to make some really difficult calls sometimes when they turn up to a crisis.
And that is correct. There is education provided to police in relation to identifying primary aggressors and the like. But when police attend a domestic violence incident, they really need to conduct the investigation, rely on and conduct a thorough investigation like with any other matter, and review the evidence that they have before them. And if there is evidence to establish an offence, the police may take action. There's always, and because we are a justice system and a legal system, what I can say is that, and Alice could probably step in here anyway, that for victims of domestic violence that are charged with offences, WDV CAS will also support them. And WDV CAS will assist in providing them with legal assistance. They'll assist them with legal aid. I don't know if Alice wants to assist there because she would know more about what they do, but the police really, they're not looking to charge a victim. They're not looking in that way. They're looking at the evidence as a whole and what's available to them at the time. And then WDV CAS steps in and assists them throughout the court process, even when they are a perpetrator. So I would hand to Alice and she might be able to assist with that side. Yeah.
Thanks, Brooke. No, you've really said it very well. Certainly, WDV CASs in their court advocacy support role can assist women who are in that particular instance alleged to be the perpetrator of violence, and it is really complicated. Sometimes it is just a misidentification, so it's wrong that they're not actually the perpetrator of violence. So we can still assist them to get legal representation and with their other needs. And then there are other instances where they might be the long-term or primary victim of violence in a relationship, but in a particular matter they have retaliated or reacted or tried to defend themselves and have now found themselves charged with an offence.
And the perpetrators use that ploy, you know, look, I've got a scratch on my face, you know, she's the perpetrator, and it must be very difficult sometimes for the police to sort that out, but certainly it is used as a form, you know, and you know, there's a lot of coercion and control going on in these relationships.
Yeah,
not necessarily physical stuff. You know, some of it is just really abusive, and sometimes very abusive.
Barbara's asked a question about whether there are specific services for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families. Jade, I might throw to you first and then ask the other panelists to comment a bit on services and responses to First Nations, you know, women and kids and families.
So I guess, you know, there's always the Aboriginal Legal Service, which we refer clients to get advice in the legal process. In regards to child protection, we do have Aboriginal specific services who we refer families to for intensive family preservation. The ones that we have here are Kari and Narang Barong. So we do refer families to them. And then there's different local organisations which are sort of specific to different what area that you live in. But there are definitely, like I think in the Penrith Mount Druitt area, we've got like Maranwijali, we've got Coolangatta. So there is always specific Aboriginal services, but it is dependent on the location of which you live and where you work.
Jade, so how would a GP or a healthcare professional find those services? Is there a central point that you can ring and say, I've got an Aboriginal patient and I've got concerns, I'd like to refer them in? Or is it a matter of Googling? Like, what's the best way to contact those services?
Yeah, look, because it is a lot of local knowledge base. So I think it is then maybe this forming connections with your local Aboriginal medical centre, because they would be the ones who would be able to direct what services and supports are available that are culturally specific.
So one of the ways I suggest to GPs that they find out what services are around, and that could involve specific Aboriginal, is to ring the 1-800 New South Wales DV line, because they've got a marvellous, you know, record of all those things. So that's what I tell the GPs to do, that to ring that service and talk to them about the services in their area.
Yeah, thank you, Libby. Alice, did you want to talk about the Aboriginal specialist workers in WDV-CAS?
Thanks, Moo. Yeah, so every WDV-CAS, Women's DV Court Advocacy Service, we have an Aboriginal focus worker. So that's a full-time role filled by an Aboriginal person, and that role is really both to directly assist women clients, but also to make sure that we're connecting with the Aboriginal community and that we're delivering a service that's safe and effective and accessible to that community in each area. So if you're not sure of the services for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in your area, absolutely, I think reaching out to the local AMS is a great option, as is contacting the WDV-CAS, and we, through the Aboriginal focus worker, could connect you. Certainly, we try and connect clients if they express a preference for working with the Aboriginal focus worker. We try and do that, or if not them, they might be known to the client, then to another Aboriginal service in the area.
Thank you. And Brooke, I wonder if you wanted to use the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Aboriginal community liaison officers, multicultural liaison officers, YLOs. I mean, there's a whole range of specialist supports within police, aren't there?
There are. There's ACPOs now. There's for pretty much every minority, almost not every, but for the majority of minorities, there is a liaison officer either within police stations. So, for example, in a police station with a high Aboriginal population, they may have two ACLOs that can assist in that space within that police area command, whereas in others where it's a multicultural command, they may have an Arabic multicultural officer and another, depending on the nationality and the demographics of that command will depend on what different MECLO is in the police area command. In the domestic violence space, if support is needed and support is required after the investigation or during the investigation, the MECLO and the ACLOs, they're always accessible to the police to obtain advice from. The ACLOs, and they're often run very much on a local arrangement within areas. So with how they deal with families, with the interaction they deal with within families, it depends on the space that they're in. It was mentioned before about like remote communities or in high population Aboriginal communities. It really depends on the relationship of the liaison officers with the communities in which they serve. So it's depending on what and how much gets done, but they are in every police station to assist in a variety of ways. And I do know they touch base with WDV CAS as well.
Holly's asked a question about early intervention for perpetrators, and I think it's actually been answered a little bit further down in the chat by somebody from Relationships Australia. Does anybody have anything to add in terms of early interventions for people who are at risk of using violence?
I think Baptist Care also offer some courses, but however, in terms of is there enough, like there isn't enough perpetrator courses or support in relating to them. Unfortunately, we often find it very difficult to get perpetrators into support in a timely manner. But yeah, Baptist Care and Relationships Australia are the two main ones.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Jade, if you want more information about men's behaviour change program work or interventions, have a look at the No to Violence website. We have a I don't know that it's 24/7, but there is a phone line support service for men who use violence or who are worried about the impacts of their behaviour on people around them. And you, as a GP, are absolutely welcome to call that number and get some advice if you're concerned about somebody who's a patient who is talking about some behaviours that you think are potentially abusive. NTV would love to hear from you and talk that through with you. Sharon also mentions the regional domestic violence officers. So I don't know if, Brooke, you wanted to talk to that anymore as well. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. In relation to I must have
I think
missed
it's maybe just where they fit within the system, because the regional DV officers they're not speaking directly with people generally, are they? That's a kind of structural thing.
Domestic violence officers in every police station, whether they're metropolitan or country, like whether they're regional or Sydney, they don't do, in most instances, they don't do the first responding. Some police area commands have a high-risk domestic violence team. So if, for example, it's a high-risk domestic violence family or high-risk domestic perpetrator or victim, the domestic violence team may respond to that domestic and may conduct the investigation in relation to the matter. But DVOs as a whole around the state don't do the responding. However, they can still be that point of contact. They can't make an appointment for everybody that, is reluctant, but there are people at times when they are reluctant, they can step in no matter what area that they're from. The roles and responsibilities for domestic violence officers are very similar, whether they're in country or whether they're in Sydney metropolitan area. I know that some, depending on the rate of domestic violence in areas, some officers have a domestic violence sergeant plus 2 other domestic violence officers plus a domestic violence team plus the general duties that will do the responding, whereas others, they don't have that amount of resource to throw in to put into investigating these matters. It really depends on the rate and the staffing within each police area command as to how much resourcing can be thrown into it.
But as a GP, I have found that ringing and talking to the domestic violence officers has been very helpful for me and also for my patients. So you won't necessarily get onto them straight away, but you can leave a message and find a time, you know, to talk to them.
Yeah, and that's lovely to hear. That's really lovely feedback to hear about the domestic violence officers.
And
Go on, Libby.
Also, you know, if you want some more information and support for something you're doing and you're not sure, then 1-800-RESPECT we've organised with them that GPs, psychologists, practice nurses, Aboriginal health workers can ring and talk to somebody at 1-800-RESPECT. You don't have to tell the person's name, and you can have a discussion with somebody who's very well trained and knowledgeable in the area.
That is a beautiful way to wrap us up, Libby. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of the panelists and experts this evening for giving us your time. Some fantastic questions. That was a really good way of, you know, getting a whole lot of information in there at the end. I'd strongly encourage you to use these QR codes for the Public Health Network domestic and family violence programs. Remember, there are places that you can get support. Libby has mentioned, Libby and others have mentioned the 1-800-RESPECT, which is the National Sexual Assault and Domestic and Family Violence Counselling Service. That's available 24/7 from anywhere in Australia. And of course, Doctors for Doctors, which is there for you as GPs and primary health carers to be able to really provide that support and that information. You know, sometimes it can be really difficult to make calls or work out just how you're going to have the conversation with a patient. Thank you all so very much for attending. Please stick around and complete the online survey that will pop up in your web browser. Remember, you need to do that to get your certificate. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us after this. We'll be sending through the information, the slides, and a few of those referral numbers. Thank you so very much for joining us this evening, and good evening.
Thank you very much, Moo, and everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.